that he talked about neighborly behavior throughout, the Sermon on the Mount. He talks about it in the parable of the guy that's on the side of the road that's beat up and mugged. And who is my neighbor? Is it the Pharisees that walk by and they say, be well, or is it the guy that takes a few denarii and puts this guy up in a hotel so that he's healed up? Right? We know what a neighbor's supposed to look like. We know what a Christly neighbor's supposed to look like, and it certainly isn't somebody that knows everybody's getting stolen from and says nothing.
I wrote The Bible and Bitcoin for you, Bible-believing Christian, and in it I lay out the biblical basis for what money is, why our current fiat monetary system is ungodly, and how Bitcoin is the best and most viable, biblically compliant replacement for government fiat money. There's even a small group study guide in the back with additional resources to study with your church small group. Get it on Amazon or pay with Bitcoin at thebibleandbitcoin.com for a discount. Welcome to another episode of the Bible and Bitcoin podcast. I am your host, Alin Armstrong, aka Pastor Coin, and today I have Brian DeMint as our guest. He's the author of Bitcoin Evangelism and Parallel, the Bitcoin Social Layer. Are those the only books you've written, or have you been co-authored anything else, or am I missing something here?
Those are my two. Those are the only two that they would allow me to write. So that's it so far. But
wait a minute, who's they?
I'm just trying to act like there's an oppressive power structure out there trying to hold me down. It's just these are my first two. I started writing a couple years ago, and so my breadth of experience is just now coming along. So yeah, I'm fairly new to this game.
Awesome. Well, you've had some success and great reviews, and I've enjoyed your writing. So the Lord bless your continued endeavors there. So before we get into any meat and potatoes of this, I got to ask the fundamental question. Your newest book, Parallel, talks about the Bitcoin social layer. Now that may seem like a strange phrase. The Bitcoin social layer? What? So please explain. What is the Bitcoin social layer?
Yeah, unfortunately, nobody can be told what the Bitcoin social layer is. You have to find out for it yourself, kind of like the Matrix. But no, for real though, it is one of those things where, and I do joke around saying that. Obviously, I can explain it, but experiencing the Bitcoin social layer actually does the best job of helping one understand it. Right? Outside people who don't interact with Bitcoin, don't interact with Bitcoiners, probably don't quite get it. It seems a little foreign. It's like, well, why do these people who care about sound money? Why is there such a synergy amongst these people coming from different backgrounds, coming from different walks of life, different countries, all sorts of things? There's a big reason, or there's many reasons for the Bitcoin social layer, but I think Knut Svanholm does probably the best job of summing it up in the introduction of the book. So Knut Svanholm, the author of Everything Divided by 21 Million and several other really good Bitcoin reads, and Daniel Prince, those two gentlemen helped co-author. They each wrote a chapter of this book, but Knut Svanholm writes the first chapter of the book talking about Bitcoin being the people. And this might sound really inflammatory, and hopefully it is. Hopefully it is it gets under the skin of some people, maybe perhaps the uninitiated. But his conclusion is that without Bitcoiners, Bitcoin is literally just zeros and ones, or ones and zeros, right? Without somebody to wield the sword is an inanimate object, right? Or the shield, I guess, in the case. That might be a more apt analogy for Bitcoin rather than a sword. Maybe it's a shield. And so, yes, this amazing discovery made by Satoshi Nakamoto, and perhaps whoever helped develop Bitcoin along the way, it would ultimately be in vain if it weren't for the Bitcoiners. For the Christians out there, we kind of inherently get this, right? There's God's word, and God is certainly sovereign and all powerful, and God can do whatever he wants in the world by whatever means he wants, and yet he chose people to be the hands and feet of his word. We are commanded to go out and be the hands and feet of that. And now Bitcoin is certainly less important than God's word, but it is still very important nonetheless. And so Bitcoin loses its relevance without Bitcoiners, without the layer zero, as I like to call it. The layer zero of Bitcoin are the Bitcoiners. Then you have the base layer of Bitcoin, layer one, and then you have, Lightning or Liquid or whatever your layer twos. So without that layer zero, without that substrate, Bitcoin ceases to be relevant. If there was nobody placing value on Bitcoin, then Bitcoin would be valueless. And that's perhaps hard for some people to hear, but it's the direct truth. And so the point of Parallel is to hopefully empower the Bitcoiner to understand his or her role in the Bitcoin, the journey of Bitcoin, right? If Bitcoin is going to make the world a better place, then you need people to help facilitate that and to I guess grease those wheels to make that happen. And so yeah, Parallel I think is for as much as we go into propaganda and programming and how the darkness of the world can be, it's a very optimistic message, because at the end of the day, the idea is you can push the wheels of history forward in very small incremental ways, and you have the power to do it in the next 5 minutes. You can do it right now. And we go into a variety of ways in which the Bitcoiner can do that.
So we know what a Christian is, I guess. Well, some people do, but there are ways we can tell. We can judge ourselves and examine ourselves in light of what the Bible says a Christian is. But a Bitcoiner is really one of those things that, can you put a definition on it? Now, you say it's layer zero. What is a Bitcoiner, really? Or is this thing just, is it fluid? Is it like gender today? Is it fluid?
There are 87 different types of Bitcoiners, actually. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, wow. It's off the list.
Yeah. Well, no, if you want to make money, like a gender theorist would, then you create new things. So there's probably a lot of money to be made in a Bitcoin book that describes the 87 different types of Bitcoiners. But no, I leave that I make that very clear in Parallel, that a Bitcoiner is literally anybody that has any kind of interaction with Bitcoin. And now somebody that buys and holds Bitcoin, or even somebody that like bought it and held it in an ETF, like I think that we can kind of parse these things out, and we can try to describe what is a Bitcoiner or whatnot on these like kind of minute levels, and sometimes those are fun discussions. But honestly, even the person who buys, and I wouldn't say that this is like the height of the goal, the highest goal for a Bitcoiner should be to go out and buy the BlackRock Bitcoin ETF. But at the end of the day, if somebody buys the BlackRock ETF and that's affecting the Bitcoin resources and allocation of where Bitcoin's going and things like that, technically there is some interaction there. Now, I would say that that's probably like the Christian who has a summer camp experience, and man, the worship music was really powerful, and so this Christian thing seems really cool, and I like the idea of being a Christian. And then they come down the mountain, and not much has changed. Perhaps you would say that person is not a Christian. So you can really get into the minutia here. But I think that most of us who are going to Bitcoin conferences that are working in this space in some capacity, or somebody that's holding their own coins in self-custody, that would be somebody that there's no restriction on that person as a Bitcoiner. Now, somebody that's out there spending their Bitcoin or accepting Bitcoin in the parallel economy, those people are the ones that are moving it forward to the greatest degree. In the same way, amongst Christianity, there's missionaries and there's pastors, and there's kind of like that benchmark for, wow, those are the super Christians, right? Well, clearly there's not super Christians, but there's people who are faithfully pushing the kingdom, God's mission forward more than others. And then there's other people that are kind of passively sitting there on Sunday. They genuinely love the Lord, but perhaps they're not living up to their full calling, but I would still say that there are genuine Christians who maybe need a kick in the butt sometimes. So that was part of the heart of the message of Parallel. I think there's a lot of Bitcoiners who are maybe in the game, maybe they are a Bitcoiner, but maybe they need a little encouragement to be prodded along in a really positive way. And I think that at the end of the day, the reason people don't get more involved in the parallel economy, the parallel system, and they don't they believe that Bitcoin's going to change the world. They just don't think that they have any part in that. What I would tell those people is that it is so easy. There are literal micro decisions you can make every day. And now if you're buying and holding Bitcoin, you've already made a decision that's disempowering the existing monetary forces in the world. So you've already done step one, but people just don't know how to act beyond that. They think that, wow, if I'm not going to be a Bitcoin business, or if I'm not going to develop the next brilliant Lightning wallet, then I have no place in Bitcoin. And there are many other ways to participate that don't take that level of effort or that level of expertise.
I'm going to start calling fake Christians ETF Christians from now on because of this interview. No one but you will understand it, and those who've listened thus far, but let's make that take off. Don't be an ETF Christian. Be a cold storage Christian. Right? Jesus said, I want you to be hot or cold. Be cold in this instance.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. I love that. That's freaking funny, yeah.
So, as we're talking about Jesus and faith, does your faith in any way in Jesus inform your work? Or how, maybe I should ask it this way, how does your faith in Jesus inform your work in advancing the Bitcoin social layer, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the deepest portion of my conviction in Bitcoin is because of my conviction in Christ. And I think like many people, I have a deep sense of justice. And when I see my neighbor or my family being taken advantage of, I have a hard time standing for that. Now, my family, almost everybody in my immediate and extended family has been orange pilled at this point and are holding Bitcoin and cold storage and doing the appropriate steps. So I feel confident that my extended family and most of my friend circle are not being taken advantage of by the Federal Reserve to the same degree that they were before, because they still hold some cash. They are still being stolen from to some degree, I guess. But for my church, for my larger community of the city I live in, the community I live in, I walk around and I'm constantly seeing my people that I care about being robbed. It's insidious because they don't know it's happening. And in the same way that if I were to walk out in front of my house and my neighbor were being held up at knife point, I believe it would be immoral and unchristian of me to just walk back in my house and just ignore it. And say, well, my family's safe. That guy's not going to come over here. Or if he does come over here, I'll call the police. I believe that as a neighbor, I'm commanded to do something, right? I don't need to go over there and try to confront this guy and put my life in danger, which I believe, I hope that I would. I hope that I would be man enough to step up and help my neighbor in that capacity. But I can call the police, right? I can shout at the guy, hey, get away from him. I can do something to raise awareness. It doesn't have to be this big heroic moment of I've got my concealed carry permit on me and I go over and I draw a weapon on this guy, or I decide to, face a mortal situation and go hand-to-hand combat with this guy, right? It can be as simple as saying, hey, did you know that like there's somebody watching, right? Hey, just so you know, somebody's paying attention to this crime you're committing. Maybe my neighbor doesn't know. Maybe he has his back turned and he's working in his garage and the guy's walking up the driveway with a knife drawn. Just as something as simple as, hey, Joe, watch out. There's a guy with a knife coming after you, right? I'm doing something to protect my neighbor. And I see the mission of Bitcoin is no different. Every single person I know, you live in a different country than I do, but you are under the same monetary forces of central banking that I am and the people I love, and everybody around the world. I don't know anybody except for in El Salvador, I guess, that isn't under those forces. And so pretty much anybody in the world, in the same way that everybody in the world has this one thing in common, that they need to hear the message of Christ, like that applies to every corner of the world. Doesn't matter what political jurisdiction you're in. Because of central banking, every political jurisdiction that people are in anywhere in the world, again, except for maybe one little tiny country in South America, they are under the oppression of theft, which is strictly talked against in the Bible, not only in the Ten Commandments of thou shalt not steal, but Christ said that he talked about neighborly behavior throughout the Sermon on the Mount. He talks about it in the parable of the guy that's on the side of the road that's beat up and mugged, and who is my neighbor? Is it the Pharisees that walk by and they say, be well, or is it the guy that takes a few denarii and puts this guy up in a hotel so that he's healed up, right? We know what a neighbor's supposed to look like. We know what a Christly neighbor's supposed to look like, and it certainly isn't somebody that knows everybody's getting stolen from and says nothing.
Yeah. I was talking to my mother-in-law the other day, and she was saying how, that's because we were talking about just Fed rates and cuts, and this is the type of stuff we talk about in my house. But she goes, that's the U.S. Who cares? We're in Canada. Deal with what's in Canada. And I said, you don't understand. The Federal Reserve is the main bank. The rest are just, they're just under the Federal Reserve, right? If the Fed does something, the whole world has to follow, and it affects the rest of the world. And so that's one of the biggest things I found in my studying with Bitcoin. What really got me being such a maxi, I guess, was that, wow, not only is my neighbor, my literal neighbor next door being affected, but my neighbors across the whole world are being affected. And most of them, it's very, very negative. Poverty and war and death and just destruction. It's very, very, very insidious and evil. Which leads into my next question about the fiat political landscape. It seems like, I don't know what you believe, that the fiat political clown world is reaching all-time highs, and it's probably at the all-time high right now. And it looks like we're in a political that's a good word, political fiat. We're in a political fiat bull market with no bear market in sight. So can this system be redeemed? Do we really need Bitcoin to replace it, or can it be redeemed?
I mean, that's the quadrillion-dollar question. I think that there's an interesting opportunity, perhaps, if Trump comes out and is the mega ultra Bitcoin bull. Maybe he sees that this is the only opportunity in fiat history for there to be a fourth option. Most Bitcoiners are familiar with the three options, but again, just for the viewer, just not knowing if everybody's level 10 maxi like you and I, and they know these three options. But when you have an unpayable sovereign debt, as when I keep looking over to the side, just so you guys know, I'm looking at the U.S. debt clock site, which is at 35.2 trillion. Since you started your sentence, the U.S. taxpayers have taken on about $1 million of additional debt. $10 million of additional debt just since the sentence started. And so it's this runaway train. You cannot put the toothpaste back in the tube. And again, those three options being, when you have an unpayable debt, how do you pay it back? Well, the first option would be austerity, and austerity just means you're getting your stuff together. You're getting your house in order. As a government, you don't just run a massive deficit, which we run in the United States, a multi-trillion-dollar deficit every year, and numbers get lost on us, and we'll maybe address that in a second. But multi-trillion-dollar deficit. So if you were to actually run a surplus, it would take you, and I did the calculation on this recently, but the U.S. has borrowed $1.8 trillion in the last year of additional borrowing. Excuse me, in the last it was less than a year period. Sorry, I'm off on the period, but 1.8 trillion was what we borrowed in less than a year. If the U.S. government were to run a $10 million per day surplus, it would take us almost 1,000 years to pay back what we borrowed in the last year at a $10 million per day surplus. So not just this massive decrease that we're running, but that's just in the last year. That's not getting back paid on our debt. That's not even chipping away the existing debt. So for all intents and purposes, austerity, this whole, like, you hear politicians, oh, we're going to balance the budget, or even Trump saying we're going to increase revenue, we're going to increase GDP. I'm sorry, Trump lovers. I'm not, no punches pulled. I'm going to probably be voting for Trump unless something changes. Not a Trump lover, but I think he's the best option in this case right here. Even Trump increasing GDP with tax cuts and all that stuff, it's not going to do that to where we can pay off that debt in a normal way. Option number 2 is default. That's not a viable option because if politicians default on the debt, their heads will roll. There will literally be heads rolling in the street because the number one holder of U.S. debt are U.S. citizens. It's your grandma and grandpa. It's their treasury bonds in their retirement. And so if you told grandma and grandpa, guess what? Your $2 million of retirement is gone. We're defaulting on that. And there's no inheritance for little Johnny or little Susie or anything like that. People will be in big trouble. And by the way, the Federal Reserve is the next biggest holder. They actually might be the biggest holder of U.S. debt. So the Federal Reserve, if you understand how that mechanism works, in order to print money, the U.S. needs to actually issue more bonds. And so the Federal Reserve is the buyer of those bonds. So the Federal Reserve the government would have to default on the Federal Reserve. The biggest bank in the world, of course, isn't going to allow that to happen. So we cannot balance the budget. We cannot default on our debt. Like, you or I, if we get too much debt, we could go bankrupt. Well, the U.S. does not have the option to go bankrupt. So the third option, again, as most of your viewers will know, is you inflate away the value. So in Weimar Germany, after World War I, their war reparations, they accounted for about $60 billion. At that time, $60 billion in US was an unpayable amount for Weimar Germany. And so what they did was they turned on the money printers. In a 4-year period, they hyperinflated their currency so badly that even though $60 billion which in their currency was like several was like something like 400 billion in the German mark, they hyperinflated their currency so bad that the smallest unit of currency after the hyperinflation was a 1 trillion mark note. So they actually hyperinflated it so badly so that their whole debt of war reparations, which 4 years earlier it wasn't payable, all of a sudden they could pay it with their smallest bill in currency because they hyperinflated their debt. So what the US will do is $35 trillion. Oh, no big deal because our smallest units of currency are $1 trillion. So let's just boom, raffle off, 35 units of currency and we're paid off. That sounds crazy and it sounds not realistic, but that is how systems break and then reset. That's just how the process has worked every single time. Now, sorry for the lengthy explanation, but for those who don't know it, that's good to run through it. Now, Trump is seeing there might be the emergence of a fourth option for the first time ever because you have a finite asset in Bitcoin and you have an infinite supply currency in the US dollar. Now, what he could say is, yes, let's continue to run up the national debt by buying Bitcoin. What you actually could potentially mathematically do is you could buy Bitcoin up at such a pace that even though inflation will go up on your US dollar, the price of Bitcoin, because it's so slim, the pool of dollars is so big so that if you bought, say, $10 trillion of Bitcoin, $10 trillion coming out of the US dollar pool doesn't actually affect the market capitalization of US dollars and inflation that much, but $10 trillion going into a 21 million coin unit creates so much value in the market that the loss of value in the US dollar is going to be smaller than the amount gained in Bitcoin. And who would be getting the biggest portion of that gain would be the US, who would hold that Bitcoin so they could theoretically pay off their debt by holding and buying up Bitcoin. Now, people could say that that's market manipulation or whatever. Well, guess what? The US government has the privilege of doing illegal things because they get to write the codes. So yeah, is it market manipulation? If you or I did it, then yes, it would be. If the US government does it, then no, it's not. It's perfectly legal. And Trump could, and I think this appeals to his ego. He could be the first person in fiat history to ever do this. You could literally have Trump talking about the history of fiat and why he's going to be the first person to ever conquer it. I'm the greatest. I'm the only one to ever beat fiat and to make the US dollar stronger. Like, he's going to say that, and it's possible that it's true.
Bitcoin Well is a non-custodial Bitcoin platform in Canada and the USA. That means every single Satoshi you buy goes straight to your self-custody. They offer free withdrawals, a simple 1% spread, and they have the Bitcoin wishing well, where you can win up to 1,000,000 Satoshis by earning points and throwing the coin in the well. In fact, you get 5 coin tosses to the Bitcoin wishing well when you sign up at bitcoinwell.com/pastorcoin.
Okay, I'm just having this thought. You let me know what you think about it. In this context, would it not be the most moral and ethical thing for the U.S. government to just print money and buy Bitcoin?
That's a good question. Is it
Because
moral? Is it moral?
yeah, because printing money it's theft, but at the same time, you will be printing money and buying this finite asset that will be able to absorb your debt, making everyone more prosperous, theoretically, right?
It's funny because I talk about this all the time, and I only really consider the pragmatism of it, of like, well, yeah, I think it would work or it wouldn't work or that sort of thing. But yeah, the moral obligation might be to do that, and that's a pretty crazy thing, because what is your fiduciary responsibility? As now politicians don't act by their fiduciary responsibility ever. They always act in their best interest. But again, we always talk about aligned incentives, and so the self-interest of a pompous President Trump to be the savior of the United States could align with the prosperity of the American people. And I think that's generally kind of my outlook on Trump, is I think this guy wants to serve himself, but I think he actually has a path to serve himself that benefits me and my country. And so I think that you're right in this case, is that, yeah, that he would actually be selecting the most moral option. I don't know. What do you think about that? I think that probably is the case. Maybe there's something I'm not considering there, though.
It's, Bitcoin, because fiat is so crooked and backwards to how the laws of the universe were made by God, right? You sow and then you reap, but fiat is you reap without sowing. Because it's so backwards, and Bitcoin is so aligned with God's created order. You have to sow to reap. You have to put in energy to get the Bitcoins and so forth, and it's scarce. That it's created this like unstoppable force and immovable object sort of scenario, wherein it's like, yeah, maybe it is the most moral and I don't know, maybe moral's not the right word. I don't know. But maybe it is the best thing for the long-term flourishing of humanity to kind of get us out of this fiat death spiral, might be to just go heavy on the printing, acquire the Bitcoin, and then the Bitcoin acts like a sort of vacuum that sucks all of that debt and fiat into itself, and allows a smooth transition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that that's part of, we were talking about parallel earlier. I think that a couple of the scenarios that I run through in parallel are exactly that. Is that there's I'll borrow Fed Chairman Powell's, euphemisms. I believe that there is a smooth landing scenario. I also think that there's a crash landing scenario where Bitcoin is actually the solution to the problem in the crash landing scenario. But I believe that in the smooth landing scenario, yeah, Bitcoin is the only option. And I think that I said this in Bitcoin evangelism, said it in parallel again. And as Bitcoiners, we're so conditioned to think, especially if you've been in Bitcoin for a long time, is that Bitcoin needs to overthrow the existing system and all that kind of stuff. But man, it could just be, such an immovable object, like you said, that the unstoppable force has to reckon with it. And the only way forward is for them to kind of mutually coexist. And that could be a really good thing. Now, it might incentivize bad behavior from other governments, because there's going to be other sovereign nations who will have these debts, and it doesn't fix other countries' debts. That's the problem. The U.S. and maybe some of the other major economies are the only ones that would be able to do this. It would be a literal cheat code for the U.S. to do it one time in human history, and then we've shot our shot. It's like a musket. You get one shot with it, but in this case, you actually don't even get to shoot again ever. But think about it: if a African country wanted to do this, they won't have the buying power to have Bitcoin get bought up at such a rate that Bitcoin goes up in value faster than their inflation goes up. Nobody else would be able to do this except for the United States. And so other countries might see it, and they might use this as an excuse to run up their national debts, because they'll tell their people that don't understand how market capitalization works. They'll say, guess what? Don't worry, Bitcoin will be the fix to this. And then they'll still rob and steal from their people. So it doesn't fix all of humanity forever. There's still going to be a huge learning curve for people to understand and do their personal savings in Bitcoin going forward. And hopefully sovereign nations will know that they can't do that, and they will start to save in Bitcoin. But I think that inevitably some sovereign nations will just use this as an excuse to look at Donald Trump fixed it, and so we're going to be able to do the same thing. They unfortunately will not be able to do that.
Yeah, now that I think about it, the United States would be literally throwing the world under the bus if they did that, because no one else could do it. I mean, it might save the United States, but the rest of the world is literally thrown under the bus. They've had to suffer under the Federal Reserve as the big boss man, and then when things got bad, the Fed just said, sorry guys, good luck, have fun staying poor. We're the only ones who can do that. So yeah, it's a mess. It's definitely a mess. But
even to your point, though, it almost might be, and maybe I'm just an American here saying this, but as you said, so goes the Fed, so goes the rest of the world. If the Fed can get its house in order, then maybe that's enough strength in the United States to help other countries kind of, maybe it provides a roadmap, for us not imposing our financial power over people going forward, because we will not be able to use the money printer in the same way. Now, the downside is, if we cleared our books tomorrow, it's going to take a lot of political will and conviction of the people and understanding of the people to not just run up the credit card again, right? I mean, if the U.S. had zero debt tomorrow, it would be hard to believe that we're not going to be, $5 trillion in debt a year from then, just because politicians will be able to promise so much. So the job of Bitcoin educators and podcasters in this next bull run, I hope and pray that every Bitcoin podcaster, that every Bitcoin author, that they get so much popularity and get invited to speak at so many events, so that we gain the high ground, so that people start asking us, or I don't care if it's me, but if it's just Bitcoin people and educators, how do we work going forward? Because if we can create good money, sound money principles and understanding amongst the population, then that's the second part of this equation to ensure we don't go back to it. Like a dog returns to its vomit, so too will we return to our debt if we're not careful.
What about taxes? You spend your Bitcoin, and there's a so-called, what they like to say, taxable events. How do we overcome that?
Well, I mean, a few things. I'm gonna for sure get in trouble at some point, because I just say this on podcasts all the time. First of all, my personal opinion is my money is not the priority of the government. It's not their jurisdiction. It's where are you coming at from first principles? And I believe that we're in a completely different system that is not part of the U.S.'s system or your sovereign nation system. And so I abide by sovereign citizen law when it comes to my transactions, and so I actually don't care about that. Now, I understand that Bitcoiners do care about that, and so my take on that, and we go through this to spend or not to spend Bitcoin and the implications of it in the book and in parallel. But if that's seen as I don't want to have to keep track of my transactions, and I don't want to have to do the accounting side of it. Well, then, have you never run a business? Okay, maybe you haven't. Have you never had to, take care of your own taxes? Maybe there's a slight bit more of work to do. But the other complaint from Bitcoiners is, well, there's not that many places to spend my Bitcoin. Well, so you're telling me that you're only talking about a few transactions throughout the year, that you're worried about keeping track of the tax implications. So you got to have it one way or the other. Are there not many places to spend Bitcoin so you don't get to spend it that often, or are there so many transactions that it's a headache to keep track of it? I find that most people, it's almost like when you're talking to an atheist, they kind of just make these arguments that they've heard before, but those aren't the real reasons why they don't follow Christ, right? They just, oh, well, I don't understand how a loving God could allow for evil things to happen. It's like, well, is that really the thing that's holding you back, or is it because you want to go out and you want to go have sex with all the women you want? Well, like that's the real reason. So, and it's the same thing with spending Bitcoin. Do you just want to hold your Bitcoin because that's cozier and easier, and US dollars are easy to use and you know how to do it? Or are you coming up with this excuse? I find that most people, they're like, yeah, you know what? Actually, it's probably not that hard to keep track of it. And the fact of the matter is, most people, if you try to spend a little bit of Bitcoin throughout the year, you're going to have 10 to 20 transactions throughout the year. It's probably not that hard because most of the places you're spending have the same tax rates and things like that. So you can just take your total, the amount you spent, and you can send that money off to the government if you want, and you get to pay it in US dollars. And guess what? Most of the taxes are actually collected by the person receiving it. So if all you're doing is spending Bitcoin, don't worry about it. Now, if you're saying, well, there's a capital gains tax on it, and that's what I'm concerned about. Well, there's software that will keep track of that for you. So you can there's all sorts of Bitcoin tax accounting software that knows what price you bought it at and what price you sold it at, which would, a spend would be, a taxable event. Well, but most people, the volatility of Bitcoin means that you're actually probably going to be spending at a loss or somewhere near zero. So your capital gain is essentially nothing on it. And so you actually don't have a taxable event because you spent it at a loss. Well, people are saying, well, I don't want to spend my Bitcoin at a loss. I also understand that. That's a valid concern as well. I had a tweet several months ago where we broke down basically if you bought something for $15 in Bitcoin, what was going to be your tax obligation? Say that Bitcoin had gone up by 25% by the time you spent it. Your tax obligation on that transaction was going to be something like 3 cents. I mean, your tax obligations are minute and irrelevant. So if you want to add up a bunch of 3-cent transactions throughout the year and pay, 30 cents, 40 cents to the US government at the end of the year, by all means, be a good citizen and go ahead and do that. And I'm not saying this from a high and mighty pompous place, but I think most IRS agents, as much as they believe in the tax code, are probably going to laugh when they see you send a check for 40 cents to the US government. And so go ahead and do that. If that's your conviction or your heart or your will, like whatever, by all means do it. Now, if you are somebody like me that spends a lot of Bitcoin and you want to keep track of it, then go the software route. Then go ahead and keep track of it with software. If you do want to pay those taxes, again, your tax obligation by the end of the year is probably going to be less than $100. So is $100 expense on taxes by being the best by the book citizen possible, is that worth building the Bitcoin circular economy or the parallel economy? I would say it is. So I don't know. I think it's just the level of conviction you have. By all means, if you're somebody that just wants to buy and hold in cold storage, God bless you, because what you are doing in your own self-interest still helps me in my self-interest. So we still have aligned incentives. So I don't care if that's what you want to do. But I think most people hope that someday their Bitcoin is accepted somewhere. The best way to take a step towards that is try to spend it at places. This is one of the I talked about baby steps. The book is full of baby steps. People say, well, I don't want to spend my Bitcoin. That's fine. But if you still want to plug into the parallel economy, guess what? All you need to do is start accepting Bitcoin. Don't spend Bitcoin, just accept Bitcoin. If you're a plumber, if you're a barber, if you're whatever you do, if somebody pays you fiat for what you do, just tell people in the gig economy or on Orange Pill app or on Twitter, put it in your bio or whatever. Just say, hey, yes, I'm a plumber. And by the way, I'm a Bitcoin plumber. I accept Bitcoin. My barber does that. I live in Southern California. I travel 30 miles to my barber, which in Southern California takes about an hour and a half. I drive an hour and a half. This barber, he's good. I like my barber, so he does a good haircut, but I also got guys down the street that do good haircuts, but they don't accept Bitcoin. So my barber gets all of his fiat customers from about 5 miles around, and then because he's on Orange Pill app, he's getting these customers from 30 or 40 or 20 miles away that are willing to drive further because they want to spend their Bitcoin. They want to interact with Bitcoin people. So we have a chapter on that. It's called The Cheat Code. We had permission from Peter McCormick to use that title because he talks about the cheat code with his soccer team or his football club. But He did it with a football club in England. You can do it as a barber in Canada, or you can do it as a grocery store, clerk in the United States. If you have a little mom and pop shop or whatever, you can plug into it without spending sats. Just start accepting sats. And guess what? I'll tell you this. It's a lot easier for some reason to spend sats you've earned rather than sats you've spent fiat on for whatever reason. There's no difference, but I've just seen that like it's easier for me because I actually, if you've seen me do sats giveaways on Twitter, those are all sats that I've mined with SAS mining. Like I get mining rewards from this like hosted mining service called SAS mining, and that's what funds my sats giveaways. It's a lot easier for me to like mentally parse out like I can give these sats away because I've mined them. I don't know what it is about that, but it's just easier to spend those sats. So that would be my encouragement to people. I gave you like a bunch of different answers there, so sorry if it gets kind of convoluted, but yes, there's tax implications and things like that. But I think people, because they don't know tax implications, sounds like, oh man, my goodness, I don't want to put myself on the line for a $3,000 tax bill at the end of the year. That's not the kind of thing you're talking about when you're talking about the parallel economy and Bitcoin expenses.
Couldn't you hypothetically just spend and replace and be at zero? I mean, just go to your exchange, whatever you use, and most of them have Lightning by now, and just go ahead and buy the amount, and you're done. It's zero, right?
Yep.
Or it might even be a loss because of the margin. So you would get a tax break on those all those transactions.
If Bitcoin's volatility, if Bitcoin went down by even 0.001% during that time, or was still at zero, like you said, there's absolutely no tax incurred. If Bitcoin goes up by 1% in that time, again, it's a capital gain on the amount you gain. So if you were buying $15, $20 worth of Bitcoin to make it, to purchase a sandwich for lunch or something like that, and Bitcoin went up by 1%, you're not paying 1% of $20 to the government. You're paying whatever your capital gains rate is, 40% of 1%. So you're paying 40 basis points on the increase. So you're talking about something that's like a penny or two of increase, even in the event that something increase. So your taxable, the tax implication of that is very, very small. So worst case scenario, you're talking about something that's pretty insignificant, but spend and replace, I think, is the way to go. I think that's the most pragmatic thing to do. And guess what? You're taking a vote away from the existing system. You just did a transaction that could have been done in fiat, but you're choosing to do it in sats. And one of the quotes I always come back to is that R. Buckminster Fuller quote about the way that we change things, the way things have always been changed, is never by raging against the existing establishment. You create a new paradigm by just making a new system that's better and just allowing people to come over to that new system, right? And so that's exactly what's happening here. The last chapter of Parallel is called Every Day is Election Day. And it's not a highly political chapter. I think politics matter, but it's not a highly political chapter. The point is that a lot of people get jaded by the elections. Oh, there's only an election every 4 years for an executive, or every, November I can vote, but my vote feels kind of inconsequential. Well, maybe that's true. Maybe you get to vote once a year. Maybe you only vote once every 4 years, or maybe you don't vote at all. But a vote in the economy is far more important than a political vote. And so the example I use is this. Imagine there's an election with 100 million people in the election. 51 million vote for candidate A, 49 million vote for candidate B. Well, guess what? The guy that got 51% of the vote, the very next day, he gets 100% of the power. It's a zero-sum game. 49 million votes literally did not matter the very next day. Now, this isn't to say, oh, your vote doesn't matter. But the point is, after the election's over, the no votes matter zero. Those don't matter at all. Now, in an economic vote, say you have a beer company that decides to put like a trans person on the can. If they did $100 million in sales last year, but then this year they only do $51 million in sales, all 49 million of those no votes, every one of those hurts them. Every one of those has an influence of power. So your economic votes are far more valuable. And guess what? When you spend in sats, your vote actually has the power of two. Because if you bought that sandwich in sats, what you've done is you've taken one vote out of fiat, and then you've added one vote to the parallel economy. So not only is it a more influential vote because it's a financial vote, it actually has the power of two: one from the old system, one for the new system. And I think when people start to grasp the power that comes along with just making incremental small votes for the parallel system, man, guess what? If we all do a few of those votes every day or every week, after a year, we've made millions and millions of votes for the new system, and it was painless. And it was actually kind of fun. Like sending a Lightning transaction is fun, but at the end of the day, it almost costs you nothing. It's very painless, and you're literally changing the world by doing it.
There's nothing more exhilarating. Maybe that's an over-exaggeration, but there is nothing more exhilarating than receiving Bitcoin for a product or service. When I get paid in Bitcoin, it's just different. It just hits different. I haven't really bought Bitcoin much in the last year. I've been being paid in Bitcoin more than I've actually been buying Bitcoin. And it does hit different. It just, there's something about it. If you've never been paid in Bitcoin, try it. There's something you can do. There's all types of apps where you can even convert your fiat paycheck and stuff. Just try getting paid in Bitcoin. You will not regret it. So you actually answered my next question. So let's go ahead and wrap up with this question. So every institution we see, maybe even before 2020, but 2020 accelerated this, is plummeting in their trust. Medicine, education, law enforcement, you name it. These institutions we used to trust are at all-time lows for trust. Nobody trusts them anymore. How does the Bitcoin social layer then, or does it bring trust back to these institutions, or is it going to just totally create a parallel situation where maybe it even obsoletes some of these institutions?
Yeah, I think it obsoletes them. Now, there's always going to be there's always going to be a industry for medicine, for example. Now, that doesn't mean institutionalized pharma is that industry. But again, we cover this in parallel. We talk about how opting out. Like I just made that point about voting for the sandwich with sats instead of dollars. We do the same thing with our medical practices. I grew up in a family that was very much a fan of Western medicine, and if I had a cold, my mom took me into the doctor. The doctor would say, "Hey, it's a virus. Here's some antibiotics." And it's like I always remember taking antibiotics for my viruses. Turns out antibiotics don't do anything for viruses. Why do doctors prescribe antibiotics? Because they're for bacteria. Why do they do them for viruses? Because people go into the doctor, and we were programmed that when you're sick, you go to the doctor. There's a copay there. There's a pharmaceutical transaction there. And so we've just empowered this industry that's not actually improving my health. Except, if anything, it's actually counterproductive to my health, because my microbiome, which is a huge part of my immune system, is actually being diminished because my microbiome is a lot of bacteria. And so my gut health is being diminished, one of the very things that I need to actually get healthier. So it's not only costing us money, we're empowering a system that's proactively mitigating our health. And so as we opt out of that, next time that I get sick and I don't go to the doctor, guess what? And I'm not saying like, oh, you're sick with cancer. I'm saying when you have a cold, you have a sniffle, when you choose not to go to the doctor and beg them for some sort of prescription, or when you I do jiu-jitsu. When I hurt my knee or I hurt my ribs and I decide not to go to the doctor, I want to see, okay, like let me process through this. And I'm not talking about I blew out my ACL. I'm talking about I got a sore knee. I could go to the doctor and he would prescribe me some pain medicine. I can do that. But every time I don't do that, and all I've done is nothing. Like, granted, I'm not actually doing anything. I'm just not going to the doctor. I'm taking a vote away from that medical establishment. Now, say my back is still hurting because it's still sore from jiu-jitsu, and I decide to go to a chiropractor and actually like physiologically alter the problem so that I'm actually getting healthy, as opposed to going to my doctor for pain management. So I'm never fixing the problem, but I'm just kind of getting on this endless cycle of pharmaceutical drugs. By the way, I'm very passionate about pharmaceutical drugs. My dad died of a drug overdose. He was a drug addict because of pain medicine leading to street drugs and things like that. So I'm very passionate about this, and it comes through in the writing. But that type of system, so yes, is holistic wellness of treating the underlying cause and not just managing the systems or the symptoms. Is that a parallel system? I think to some degree it is. Now that's not new, but it's a parallel system. There's Western medicine and there's holistic medicine. Same thing for diet, same thing for food, for all these things. So I think that Bitcoiners tend to gravitate towards those healthier food options too, that we're not going to Tyson's food because they have insect meat in it now. Now, I believe that that's the development of a parallel system. Now, let's say that if everybody does go to a Bitcoin standard, I actually do think it fixes a lot of those problems, even for the institutionalized places, because guess what? COVID, for example, would not have happened. Now, I'm not saying this disease that was out there, that still would have circulated and, whatever, would have ran its course. I'm saying COVID, when we think of COVID, what COVID was, lockdowns, masks, mandates, all sorts of things like that. People hating each other, just the visceral impact we have to the word COVID. COVID would not have existed if it wasn't for the existence of a central bank. And you think about it, and I stand by that statement. That's not hyperbole. If you told everybody you have to stay in your house, you cannot go to work, you cannot go to school, you cannot provide for your family. If you told people to do that, and you also didn't at the same time bribe them with stimulus checks and bribe them with free unemployment benefits, and you didn't bribe businesses, hey, we'll give you 3 months of payroll just to shut your mouth and go shut down. And by the way, we'll give you a $1 million loan for almost 0% interest just to finance your business operations. If you didn't bribe people with money, not money that came in from tax revenues, but money that was solely created by what the Fed specifically said was, it's just a few strokes on a keyboard. Don't worry, it's just a few strokes on a keyboard. If you didn't have that power, if you didn't have unsound money, you could not have bribed everybody to stay at home. Literally, politicians' heads would have rolled, right? People would have been in the streets. They would have been protesting, or they would have just gone back to work and they would have said, up yours, like we're not listening to this, right? One or the other. But because you were able to bribe people and have them stay inside, the system was able to function as its corrupt self. And that is true for every industry. College is a scam because we tell every kid that they can go to college, and so we subsidize college and we ramp up the cost of college because we subsidize it. That comes from central banking. People, why do kids leave college, $120,000 in debt? It's because there's a central bank that allows us to tell everybody, hey, we'll give you a grant to go to school, even though you shouldn't be going to college because you didn't pass your exams and all that kind of stuff. But we want to make sure that our quotas are hit. College is expensive because there's a central bank. Pharmaceutical drugs are expensive because there's a central bank. Opening a business is more expensive because there's a central bank. Everything is more expensive because there's a central bank. And so, yes, would these things be fixed if we went on a sound money standard? Yeah, if there's a Bitcoin standard someday, these things get fixed. If these people don't decide to fix them, the R. Buckminster Fuller thing plays out. We have a better system. The old system, it can continue to eke on, but people will start to realize that new system is just better. Why wouldn't you want to be on that new system? And so I believe that it's blue skies ahead, one way or the other, in terms of a monetary world order. Now, there's other forces at play. Satan has all sorts of tricks up his sleeve, but that's kind of the logical line of thinking about how I think things are playing out in this next epoch of human history.
Well, Brian, this has been enlightening. Thank you. That almost sounded like I said like enlightening. No, enlightening. Anyways, this has been very good. It's been very good. Thank you for coming on the show. Where can people find you if they want to know more about you or follow your work?
Thanks, Alan. Appreciate it, man. No, I love, dude, I've got like 3 good Bitcoin puns out of you today. So we have ETF Christians and and Lightning. You can find me on all the usual places. I'm on Orange Pill app. If you like to meet Bitcoiners in real life, I like to meet Bitcoiners and grab coffee. I'm somebody that's happy to put myself out there and meet people in person because I think that there is an important aspect to in real life connections. I obviously work at Orange Pill app, but I was a member of Orange Pill app before I worked there. So I'm a true believer in connecting with other Bitcoiners. I have a YouTube channel that's kind of new, so you can go just my name, Brian Dement. or Bitcoin evangelism on YouTube. And that whole thing is just meant to be a resource for Bitcoiners to orange pill their friends. It's all shorts. The only kind of content I'm creating is 30 to 60-second content of, well, I heard Bitcoin isn't scarce, because it's infinitely divisible. Like, I try to answer dumb arguments like that because plenty of people will say that to a Bitcoiner, or, Bitcoin's like tulip mania. So I have a 60-second or 45-second short on that. Like, here, send this to your friend to orange pill them. So that's the whole point of that YouTube channel. But my books are on Amazon. Like you said, fiat sucks, and I do sell the books through Amazon. And just for anybody that knows how bad fiat sucks, when somebody buys a book through Amazon, thank you so much for your support. Amazon on the back end, they don't pay authors for like 90 days. That's how slow the fiat system is. If you guys want to buy a book in sats, please reach out to me on Orange Pill app. I gladly take sats. When you send me payment, I get it within 3 seconds as opposed to 90 days. So thank you for being literally millions of times faster, Bitcoin. But yeah, those are the main places where people can find me or find my work.
Okay, yeah, Bitcoin is superior. When I put out my book in September, I didn't get my first payment till like December. It was wild. I'm like, what? All this money just showed up in my account. I go, what is this from? I go, oh, wow, it took that long. Just incredibly inefficient. Anyways, thank you, Brian, for coming on the show, and God bless you, and to the rest of you, thanks for viewing, like, subscribe, do all the thing. Grace and peace.
Your family, your nation, and your world needs strong men. The devil wants men weak, emasculated, and addicted to porn. This is why I designed the Slaying the Beast course to help men take back the dominion porn stole from them. This course will help you discover your identity as God's image, how porn leverages and twists that against you, and how with God's help you can turn the tables on the beast and live free. There's also access to a Discord server where you can have fellowship with others in the fight. You do not have to wait any longer to conquer this beast once and for all. Go to lifegiverchurch.net to get started today.